Hello BookTube and welcome to a new video. I haven't read any books this week for the simple reason I've got a week's leave from work and I'm working on my new novel. So when I write I try not to read and have stuff permeate that, that I'm not even aware is permeated. The other big change from normal is that after we've been in this house since 1999, so it's what, 20 years. And this was always like a baby's room. I don't know if you remember, it had the Rothko paintings in between baby wallpaper. Well, look, the wallpaper has been stripped in preparation for some decorating that's going to happen next month. But I rather like this sort of stripped back aesthetic. So what do you think? I don't get to choose the decor because I share this room with my son and he's been allowed a say in the paint scheme, but I haven't. Yeah, what are you going to do? I can't imagine Beckett was arguing over paint schemes in Paris. Okay, so because I haven't read, I'm going to do a tag. And this is the Drunken Book Tag, and I was tagged by Big Hard Books and Classics, with whom we've been back and forward about Beckett v Joyce, the merits thereof. And originally this tag, which I think is about 3 years old, so late to the party, both me and Big Hard Books, was by somebody called Pages and Pens. I don't know if I can find the original tag post. I will put that in along with Big Hard Books and Classics' version. So the first disclaimer is I don't drink, so a lot of the idiom of these questions I find perplexing, but bear with me. Having said that though, my debut novel from 2009 called A, B and E, the chapters were interspersed with cocktail drink recipes, so go figure. Okay, question 1. Wine coolers. You're 16. Oh, if only. And you finally managed to sneak one of your mum's Smirnoff Ices. What is one of your most guilty pleasure reads? Well, I haven't read these for a long time and I probably wouldn't read them now, but I went through a phase of reading books by English football hooligans. Because most clubs in England in the 70s and 80s and even sort of the 90s had their own crews or firms because football was at that time didn't have much money. Most teams' performances on the pitch were lamentable and the supporters always took it upon themselves that they were the true representatives of the clubs, that they would climb up the league table of hooliganism and violence and thereby represent their club. And there was a spate of books by hooligans from each of these teams, and I read quite a few of them, and obviously they're not very well written, but they're all the same, just change the name of the club. 2. Beer. You've made it to college and are hosting your first kegger. I know what a kegger is, but really, you Americans. Pick your favourite new adult or college-aged book. Well, that implies that one was only reading YA or teen fiction up until the moment of college when suddenly you were ushered into adulthood, which is obviously a nonsense. And I can't really remember reading books that are set in universities because I was put off all of that by David Lodge's novels and Simon Gray's stage plays, which are just set in those worlds and they're so small and insignificant, I'm afraid. So all I can offer is, I studied history, and of course most of the books you read are, the recommended reading for your course. But I did take advantage of my university to track down a copy of Kafka's The Castle, quite an old edition, which is an uncompleted book. And I read that sort of in between my history, and I love of all the Kafka novels, I think that's probably my favourite, even though it's the least complete of them. I don't even own my own copy because I read it back then at college, and that stayed with me. Question 3, Tequila. You partied too hard last night, as if, and drank a little too much Jose Cuervo. What's a book that you never want to see again, or your least favourite book? Well, I've bored on about my least favourite book, which I'm, so for this, whatever change, I'm going to talk about a book I read 2 years ago, which was Paul Auster's 4321, which is basically 4 versions of the same sort of life story of a boy in New York, goes to one of the Ivy League colleges, completely sort of middle class and well off. And although there's 4 divergent stories as different events happen, a bit like the sort of the butterfly effect or whatever. You know, he's sort of smug and self-satisfied and sort of whines a lot in all of them somehow. I just hated it, and I couldn't help feeling that this was Oster, you know, in his dotage, looking back on his own life and thinking, well, what if that had happened rather than that? Which is fine, but, you know, the character was so... It just seemed self-indulgent. Beer Bong. Shouldn't that be Beer Pong? What's a book that you read super fast? Well, the nature of my reading is I read on my commute to work, from work, in the bath, and occasionally I will sit down and read at home. Which means I don't really have sort of great chunks of time for reading. They're sort of broken up. So, for example, I read Alice Vs Spring quite quickly last week in a couple of days, but it was in a couple of days over 5-6 sessions. So I don't call that a quick read. But what I can offer you, because it's only 56 pages, is Jared Kobeck's If You Won't Read, Then Why Should I Write? Which is a brilliant, you know, I would have given it 5 stars, and it is so slight at 56 pages. It's basically, he's reproduced snippets that presumably are in sort of the public domain of celebrities and dictators' homemade videotapes. So we're going back to the sort of the early form of the technology, really, when it's still a bit sort of new to people. And these are sex tapes, drug-taking tapes, mission statements as they whine, you know, how dare they get arrested, and, you know, it's all in artistic freedom and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it's brilliant, you know, you just see the vacuity of these people. They're so vain that, you know, even their sort of, you know, petty, boring pleasure seeking, they record and put it out in the public domain in case we forget about their very existence for 2 minutes. It's a fabulous satire, and between each chapter for each of the celebrity videotapes is the rap sheet of the real life rap sheet of the main person from the previous story. It's a fabulous satirical piece of work. Spring Break. You throw your inhibitions to the wind and end up having a sexy night you'll never forget. What's your favourite smutty read? It's probably Vox by Nicholson Baker, which is a book about phone sex and has 2 characters, a man and a woman, having phone sex throughout. But it's fantastically written, it's very engaging. Both the man and the woman are sort of equals. It's just a great read, as early Nicholson Baker was, until he's rather got off the ropes recently. 6. Screwdriver. What's the most twisted book you've ever read? Well, I don't really find books twisted because I think I probably have quite a twisted imagination myself as a writer and as a reader. So I watch a lot of true crime. So what mankind gets up to or is capable of doesn't really surprise me. Having said that, Miranda July's book, the last worst man, the first worst man, something like that, has a couple of brilliantly sort of screwy psychologies. I can't remember exactly, but it's something like the main female character is having sex with her roommate, who's a younger woman, who they've had knockdown fights before they start having sex together. But the main character imagines herself as the man screwing this woman. That's the only way that she could come. And then there's another slightly weird thing about the main character. Her company makes self-defense films for women, and she becomes obsessed with watching them. And the main actress who does this, and she sort of incorporates that into her sexual fantasy life, which then she brings to, you know, her real sex. It's worth the read. It's not what I sort of would have anticipated from Miranda July, but it's a really interesting and kooky book. If you take away the notion of twist as in sort of morally repugnant or whatever, just in terms of twisting my melons, in terms of what fiction is, what literature is, David Markson's This Is Not a Novel. to this day, having read it sort of 2 years ago, I'm still trying to work out what makes this a novel. It's so ingenious. It just keeps me reflecting on all fiction. Just this 140-page book. Fabulous read. 7. Long Island Iced Tea. The melting pot of alcoholic beverages. What is one of your favourite diverse reads? Well, anything by the author Neil Bartlett, who most people probably haven't heard of because he has a slightly more famous career as a theatre director. But he's a fabulous novelist. He only does one about every 10 years because he has all these other calls on his time. But there's one book in particular called Skin Lane, which is sort of set in it's probably gone now, but in the leather cutting trade that used to be in the East End of London. And it's a foreman in a leather cutting, I don't know if you call them factory or whatever, who's totally besotted with this straight guy who's engaged to be married. And just the desire that oozes and drips from every page. It's the best representation of desire, straight or gay, that I've ever read in fiction. It's wonderful. 8. Sex on the Beach, which is one of the cocktails I give the recipe for in my book A.B.&E. Sex on the Beach, a drink that's great in theory, but wasn't exactly all it was cracked up to be. What is a book that just doesn't live up to the hype? Well, I try not to get in the hype trade, really. If I read a book that's been hyped, I'll probably wait at least a year for the hype to die down before I read it. But having said that, I don't know how hyped this book was. I've seen it talked about a lot when at the time. And that was Edouard Louis' History of Violence, which is really hard to dislike because it's a gay character who's been raped. And it's everything that one would find hard to sort of disagree with, and yet the way it's written, it managed to alienate me and not feel sorry for this character. It's a very strange experience. I've got a video dedicated to trying to explain that phenomenon that I felt, so I'll post the link to that. 9. Wine. You've just gone through a rough breakup, so you park yourself in bed with your favourite bottle of wine, some ice cream and a bucket for your tears. Name a book that made you cry out all of your feels. Okay, first of all, ice cream and wine? That makes no sense at all to me. They're completely, war and sort of cancel each other out on your palate, the delights of both. Second of all, cry out all your feels. Come on, guys. I mean, what does that even mean? I don't cry at books. I can't think of a book that would make me feel like that. All I can offer is one of my own published flash fiction stories called Echoes, which is the shape of an unborn child described through the sonogram, when it's sort of projected on a screen, the outline through bouncing sound waves at the fetus, which are non-invasive and don't hurt it. I've had people tell me that story made them cry, and I've read it out live at gigs, and someone came up to me afterwards and told me it made them cry. So, the fact that I don't cry doesn't mean I'm an unfeeling person, apparently. 10. Strip Club. What's the sexiest naked book? Well, any book that you've ripped the covers off to get to the words inside quicker. But seriously, this is called The Body in Sculpture by Tom Flynn, and it is about a sort of history of representation of human torso and anatomy in sculpture and art. It took me a long time to track this down, but I did eventually. So just to give you an idea, because obviously being an art book, it is lots of nice pictures. Whoa. Whoa. Mmm. I jumped that marble bones. Anyway, you get the picture. And finally, to tag some people. Well, this has been out for 2 or 3 years, so I'm sure most of you have done it. So people are going to mention apologies if you have already done this, but if not, I'm tagging you. So the first is Todd the Librarian. You see Todd tapping a can and drinking it, but that is, of course, iced coffee. So, no worries there. The next is Sean the Book Maniac, who does sometimes what he calls tipsy tags. But let's be quite sure that the glass he holds has red currant juice and he is tipsy on life. And then there is Celia and Elizabeth at Bookish North. I'm taking you guys. When we met up in London last month or a couple of months ago, it's completely abstemious, so not one drink of alcohol past our lips. So guys, if you haven't already done it, over to you. And thanks very much to Big Hard Books and Classics. I guess in a way this was our duel. This was a literary duel because I virtually gauntleted his cheeks because he insulted Beckett and said choose your weapons, and I guess he's chosen this, which is the best response possible. So cheers, Guy. Till next time, thanks very much.